starting a company is one thing, but the whole journey is the hardest thing one would ever do, but is also the most exhilarating thing that one can do. I learned so much in 6 months that I hadn't learned in the previous 12 years. You are learning how to interact with people. You are learning how to do accounting, how to do marketing, how to create market for your products or how to sell your own product. When will we run out of energy just working harder and faster? Nobody cares what you did before. All they care is that you didn't get fired. VCs are learning from entrepreneurs, and that happens all the time, even today. So be mindful of it. Don't put yourself too much below VCs to pitch to them. They are going to get value out of it. That's why they are talking to you. Don't be so desperate. Listening to yourself, listening to your instincts is important. Women in general are not taught to do that. They are always looking for endorsement of other people. And we say, well, they lack confidence. But what is this confidence? The confidence to me means that we can do it. Listen to yourself. You are not going to work your life with somebody else's brain. You got one brain and one only brain. That's how I operate my life.
Our guest today is Vinita Gupta, the first woman of Indian origin to take her company public in the United States. Vinita was the founder, CEO, and chairperson of Digital Link Corporation. She led Digital Link to a successful IPO in the 90s. She also has 2 patents to her credit. Vinita has received numerous awards and recognitions. Her board positions include stints with Stanford Medicine Center for Asian Health Education and Research and the Indian School of Business, among many others. She's a national bridge champion and a thoughtful essayist on a variety of topics in business and in life. Now, here's Vinita. So good afternoon, Ms. Gupta. We're so happy to have you here with us today on Invisible Inc.
I'm looking forward to it, Shubha.
Awesome. I want to talk about a bunch of different things, maybe 3 main things we'll talk about. The first and foremost is you're the first Indian American woman to start a company and take it public in the United States. I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions about your journey of starting, running, and exiting a tech company. So what did the company do and what was your motivation to start this in the first place?
So let me start with what the motivation was. When I dived into it, I think I was ready for major transformation and transition. Transformation in my professional journey and transition meaning I was not happy doing what I was doing. So the combination of that was, what else can I do? And sitting in Silicon Valley, it wasn't so unnatural to think, being an electrical engineer, it wasn't so difficult to think that, oh, maybe I can start a company. And I didn't have that in mind, but I gave myself 3 months. If I found myself after I quit without having concrete plans, I felt like if I don't find in 3 months something to do, 90 days, I gave myself a hard line. I'm going to start a company, because the path to start a company was not so obvious at that point in time.
Interesting.
So that is what was the motivation. It was, as much as I say what led me to do it, I would also say definitely making a lot of money was not a motivation, because we all know that it is very few companies succeed. And when you start as nobody, you always think about you probably are not going to succeed, but you don't let yourself drown in that fear. So it was not to make money, it was to do something which was more purposeful.
So help me understand. So you've just quit a corporate career. You've given yourself 90 days. Is the 90 days to find another interesting job, or is it to come up with an idea?
Both. Decision-making, if I look back, decision-making for me has always worked out better when I pursued 2 alternatives. Not too many, but not only one, because then what choice do you have? So yes, the answer is I was going to look for another job, which I could have found in a similar competitive space in the Valley very easily. But I didn't want to jump from pan to fire, so as to say. So I decided that I'm going to look for job which I am looking for, which was making a transition into something. And at that time, I could only think about from engineering to marketing. And it wasn't easy in those days to make that transition if you haven't done it before.
Got it. So you're looking for motivation. You use the word purpose, which is hard to kind of combine with engineering, at least to my brain. I know you filed you have two patents. So were you looking at those patents as a source of inspiration? Were you looking at what the market was lacking? Where were you looking for ideas for your business?
Where I was looking for ideas and where the idea ultimately came from were two different things. One of my friends who had worked in the same company that I left, he came to me and he said, if you ever think of starting a company, give me a call. So he had about same experience as I did. So I gave him a call and then we both sat down. So now it was like, let's think about two alternative ideas, what we start the company in. And I was working in something which would have required a huge amount of capital. And he was working, he had a very niche idea of what we could make. And he had seen that because that's what he was working on in those days. So we ran with his idea rather than my idea, which we said, we don't know how to raise capital. So how are we going to go and raise capital? So that gave me an impetus to do something because we were there for each other to encourage each other because you need a lot of encouragement as you take your initial journey. So it was his idea. He was the engineer and I was the rest of the company, sweeping the floors to accounting to marketing, whatever it takes. It didn't feel small to do that. I mean, we do what it takes.
So how much would you say there was an overlap between your domain expertise and the core of what was needed for this company's engineering part?
Core expertise wise, it was very similar. But the product idea was I had a grandeur product in mind and he had, it's like, if you look at shelf full of equipment, you can make the whole shelf with everything in it, or you can make just one card in the shelf. And we were a piece, and that was more manageable. And that is what actually led to our success, because then we expanded and built a full blown system, as they say. Initially, we started with a hardware-based company, but then when we reached the system level, we had a lot of embedded software. So then it was a hardware software company, but that was an evolution.
Got it. So then you're looking at both the ideas. Clearly, capital was the tiebreaker to say, hey, this is something we can start sooner versus this requires a tremendous amount of capital, so we won't go this way. Did you do a formal market analysis? Did you figure out how much demand there would be or what you could charge for this? At least at a high level, what did you evaluate?
We evaluated because we had our runway was small because he put in money, I put in money. So we were self-starters. Our runway was small. We did our business analysis. How long will our money last? We knew how much it would take to develop the product. There were two aspects which I now get reminded of. We borrowed Gartner research report, marketing research report from another colleague who had left the same company, but he had gotten venture funding, so he could afford to buy all those marketing researches. We could not. So we got the marketing research from him. The rest was, I would call, going to trade shows and looking at competitive products, not disclosing to them. That's what we intend to do. I mean, that makes no sense because we didn't know where we will end up being. So we were a little cagey in doing that, going there pretending as if we are potential buyers, which we were not.
I can imagine. I can practically see the scene. So then did you also have certain milestones, especially given you had a short runway, right? Money was going to run out at some finite point. How did you set up any milestones or checkpoints to say, are we on the right track? Is this succeeding? What were those milestones and how far apart?
The problem that time was we knew we will be on milestone. It's like when you have to get something done, the milestones are ingrained in your head. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to look back. But what was important was we two engineers starting a company, we knew how to build a product. We could even learn manufacturing pretty quick because you go through external manufacturing people. But what we did not know was how to market and sell the product. What we didn't know about that there are distributors through which you do go through, or you have to battle door to door. Our customers were business customers, so we were B2B business. So you can call up customers, but who to call, what person to call in a large company? They were Fortune 500 companies that we were selling to. So we became very creative. We asked for the directory of Nortel Networks, which is where we worked for. We asked a friend, not really directory, but we wanted to get names of their distributors, people who were selling Nortel's product. And we approached them and we asked them if they would sell our product. So you're discovering how to sell. And that is an unknown road. Nobody can predict what your sales are going to be and how soon, but we were motivated. And if we got the one end of the thread, we chased it down and we took it to, and that worked out really well for us.
So in those early days, especially given that you're learning something that you've probably never done before, was there ever a point where you felt like it was really dark and you may have reached potentially the end of the road? Was there like a big moment like that was hugely challenging to you? Not because of the technical challenge, but just because of the unknown unknowns and the fact that you don't know these skills.
Yeah. So there were downs and there were a lot of ups. Ups is what kept us going. And in terms of what did we discover after 5 months, I looked over my shoulders to say, what am I doing here? Because nothing was happening the way we expected. Some things went better than expected. Some things basic thing was it's like learning through a fire hose. I learned so much in 6 months that I hadn't learned in the previous 12 years. On every area, you are learning how to interact with people. You are learning how to do accounting. You are learning how to do marketing. You are learning how to create market for your products or how to sell your own product. And then would come the phase when we would start looking for VC money, and when will we grow out of 2 people? How will we manage? How fast? When will we run out of energy? Just working harder and faster. So everything was such a huge learning experience to pinpoint my finger and say, oh, this is what was the most difficult thing is so difficult. And every year in the beginning, every year for the first 4 years, there was a different challenge that had to be overcome.
Got it. And that's a fair point. So then you mentioned that through this process, you came to a point where you had to raise funding, you had to reach out to VCs. Can you talk a little bit about what your experience was in the fundraising process? Was it very different as a woman founder then? Do you think anything has improved today? Can you just walk us through how it felt to go ask for money?
Money raising environment was very different 30 years back, or I should say 40 years back. Money raising environment was extremely different. In fact, what happened was that we used to place small ads somewhere about our products. You have to sell your product. And a few companies, they contacted us wanting to talk to us. And they wanted to buy us. And at the same time, I used to be on the board of my husband's company, and the VC who funded his company, he was somehow tracking me without not so hard to track the space, but he knew who I was and his company, and he contacted us. And when they found out that there was an interested buyer, And there was. They basically said, well, why would you want to sell the company? We'll give you money and you can run your company for as long as you want and make it much bigger. This is like 2.5 years through the journey. So it was a very different environment. I think there were other venture capitalists who came to see my company, and I don't remember how I contacted them. But when they came, there were some big names in the valley. And because we were in the internet space, it was considered a very hot space to be. So there was a very interesting, I'm forgetting the name of his company, but Roy Rogers, he was a big father figure in those days in the Valley. He came to visit me, and my partner had left by that time. And he still was holding 50% of my stock because that was the agreement, because he had put in half the capital, I had put in half the capital. So he came and advised me that I should buy his stock. So I said, I have very little money. He said, whatever it is, as far. He never ended up investing, but he gave me a very valuable advice. And they were very respectful. So I never felt like they treated me any less because I was a woman.
That is so different from some of the stories I hear today. And it's so good that it was good back then. I hope we could get back to those days.
Well,
again.
When you have a little, like I was doing, I initially started the company, so I had some success to show. So there is a difference. If you have a person with an idea, they don't know you. If they don't know you, unless you have done a company before, if they don't know you and you are person with an idea, then you are amongst thousands of other entrepreneurs who are pitching in. And in that time, I can imagine biases might creep in. But I had a proven track record of building the business from very little capital.
And this was your track record after you quit corporate. So this was your track record as an entrepreneur.
Exactly. Nobody cares what you did before. All they care is that you didn't get fired. Maybe these days it is a good thing to get fired, but I had worked for 2 companies in 12 years. That was a very good track record. More than that, they were only interested in what space I was in, why was I in it, what do I think would happen. I had a little more knowledge than them. Any new space in technology, especially, that entrepreneurs, their lives depend on that. They dive in. In fact, VCs are learning from entrepreneurs, and that happens all the time, even today. So be mindful of it. Don't put yourself too much below VCs to pitch to them. They are going to get value out of it. That's why they are talking to you. And you are going to get money from that. But it is like, if you're not going to get money from them, don't be so desperate, would be my only message.
Good counsel. You mentioned that your founder had left by then and he had still got 50% of the stock. What led to his departure and how did that affect your motivation and your direction in terms of leading the startup? What impact did that have on you?
Well, that is a very interesting story, but I will not drag you through that story. The long and short of that was that being a partner in a business is like a marriage, and you can get on each other's nerves. And he felt I got on his nerves and he just couldn't stand me. And that is a pretty damning thing when you hear that from your business partner, that you think that you are doing everything right. And suddenly he says, I can't tolerate you and I'm going to quit. And I was down for a few days, but then I got myself going, and my husband was a big support behind, and he kind of mentally helped me get back into the bandwagon and roll the dice again.
Got it. And was there one thing, like a pillar or anything that helped you anchor through that experience that said, this is why I'm going to come back as hard as it is after that setback?
Frankly speaking, I think that is I'm a fighter. So if something looks difficult or impossible, that's what I want to do. So I wasn't going to give up. I mean, It is a very humiliating thing that you start a company and you don't succeed. People don't realize that. So I wasn't going to shut the door within a year after I started just because I was going to give it another shot. I didn't know I'll succeed, obviously, but I was going to give it another shot somehow. And I did put myself together.
Got it. So then now you're back on track. You've got a different trajectory because you're now a solo founder, essentially. You're doing this on your own. What are you now thinking about in terms of fundraising, in terms of future path? What is the next step in the growth of this company?
Growth was the thing. How do you grow? And being in hardware business, you do need money. I didn't need money because we started making money. We were profitable pretty early on because we wouldn't have survived if we did not become profitable. But to give yourself a professional outlook, you have to have a business partner like a VC. So my motivation in getting VCs at the time was not as much money, which brings me back to the earlier statement that I was not so desperate to get money, but I wanted to take it to a different path rather than being on everyday struggle, which is what I was on. Little did I know that path will continue the struggle part. So that is what the money did, because suddenly I was able to, after we raised the fund, we were able to attract senior executives to build the company so that I was not involved at the ground level running everything. I could think at a higher level. And now my challenge was how to manage the business direction through them, because now they are source for ideas, new ideas. They were, in some ways, they were much smarter than I was, but that didn't prevent me from hiring them. And the biggest question I asked is, why did they join this tiny little company? Because one guy came, he was my VP of engineering. He came and he said, oh, no. Later on, he reflected. He said, when I first walked into Digital Link, it felt like I was walking into a doctor's office. A little front entrance and something happening in the back doors. But that's what I was looking for at the time. I said, oh, really? That's what people look for. So people forget that not just the founders, but people who come and knock on the doors of startup and want to and apply for the jobs in startup, they are also superhuman beings. They think very differently because they know that the risks are high, rewards are unknown, and they are not as much in control of the situation as the founders are. So I think in Silicon Valley, people do not give credibility to the people who come and work for startups.
Got it. So 2 questions on this, getting this new team members in place. One is, how did you hold them together? How did you keep them on board and keep them kind of coming along with you? And then secondly, how did you transition? Because you're used to doing everything, especially after your partner quit. You're doing accounting, you're doing this, you're doing that, and now you have to hand off things to other people who maybe didn't do it as well as you thought you could. How did you make that transition successfully?
Transition was like a sigh of relief because I didn't have to do everything in that way. But keeping the team together is not everybody does it well, but I did it very well. And again, I recently heard this statement. It is information sharing that builds respect and trust. So that showed them that I respected them, that I shared all information. What the VC said in the board meeting, what happened here, there, I never held back anything from them. And in return, they gave their best to me. And they stuck together with me for a very, very long time.
Got it. And do you think how much of that is due to the fact that you're a woman? Because there's the understanding and belief is that women tend to be more collaborative. Do you buy that? And do you think your gender had something to do with your style of managing your leadership team?
So all the people happened to be white males that I hired. So at that time, Indians in the valleys were not at that level. So I think in the first 10 years, I probably had a director level person who was an Indian. Otherwise, we did not have anybody in the team which was Indian or woman, but not a VP. All the VPs were white males. And there was nothing that I ever felt that they were not willing to work with me because I was a woman. One individual who was our VP of, I hired him as VP of sales, was probably 15, 20 years older than me. And he was, I didn't, I was still debating whether to hire him or not. So he asked me for an interview again. He asked me, called me back. He said, I want to come and see you for an hour. So he came to my office. And one sentence, which I will never forget, that he said, he looked at my eyes, and he was a salesman, yet, believe me. He said, if you are thinking that I will not listen to you, believe me, I will. And that made me hire him. The age could have been perceived as a barrier, and that he somehow sensed it, because that was exactly what I was thinking.
Got it. A perceptive guy. So clearly the right person to be in sales.
Very perceptive.
So do you think that is the case today? Like, it's such an interesting juxtaposition of where you saw things, when you were building the startup versus what you observe today as an investor or just a person in Silicon Valley. How much do you think that has changed? I'm just curious. Do you think that's still the case, that there's this lack of bias and this openness to seeing, I'll kind of judge you on your merits and not by the color of your skin or your height or the accent in your voice? How would you contrast the two?
I think the bias in Silicon Valley is, if there was X amount of bias in those days, 40 years back, it is X by 10 now. It has reduced dramatically, the bias against this. There is more talk than actuality. And when it comes to entrepreneurship, people are only interested in what would make them money. Outside people, founders are looking for whatever they are looking for. They are not looking for money by and large. But investors, everybody wants to see companies successful. They buy product from you because your product will save them money, make their job easy. So they are not doing favor to you by buying from you, and they don't care how you look, what your accent is, whether you're a man or a woman. So I would say that by and large, it is more rational. I wouldn't say that it is totally absent, but by and large, I would say it is a very entrepreneurial journey, is more puristic journey than trying to fit ourselves in the corporate jobs.
That I can certainly agree with, but I'm definitely going to test what you're saying, because it's very different from what I'm hearing from others. But obviously, you come from a place of experience. So there's a tremendous amount of weight I would place on what somebody like you would say. Thanks for sharing that. Before we dive back into our conversation, I want to tell you about Seed to Success. Seed to Success is our community letter with our proprietary insights on startup financial storytelling, tips, new episodes, and much more. If you find these discussions helpful in your entrepreneurial journey, use the link in the description to subscribe to Seed to Success today and get all of these and much more straight to your inbox every week. Now, back to our conversation. So then coming back to your journey, right? So you're doing all this stuff. You've got a leadership team in place. I know at one point you decided to go public in 1994. What drove that? Is it just the fact that's what you normally do in the stage of growth for that? Or is it just the fact that the markets are starting to heat up, leading to the 1998, 99 hype in internet businesses? What drove that decision?
Well, it is, like you said, it is the growth. If you are growing and you can go public, that is a way to provide liquidity for your investors. So you can sell the company if you find a good buyer at a good, decent enough price, or you can go public. Going public was considered then a better alternative. And since we could go public, it is like, the markets, which I did not understand that time, but IPO markets open and close, that sometimes receptors are more willing to go up into buy stocks of IPO, of initial public offering. IPO stands for initial public offering, and sometimes they are not. And our VCs were a big set of advisors for guiding us through that process. So it was like, okay, since you can go public, let's go public now rather than wait another year.
And what was your thinking? So first of all, did you consider an acquisition at all? Or was it just, hey, it's a hot market, so let's just do it? Where was your mind at on that?
Well, I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything about how to provide liquidity, but I knew that the investors will look for liquidity. And since we trusted them, I did not go shopping. And in those days, acquisitions were not as popular as they are now. And there is a reason for that. But those days, the people did not acquire companies. Landscape on that front has changed. So going public was a very good alternative.
And what was the biggest learning leap for you in terms of transitioning from a private company CEO to a public company CEO and just going through that whole IPO process?
Yeah, so the biggest surprise, I would say, was that it is like wearing another hat. You have to communicate, meet the expectations, and you have to button down. Before that, we ran the company, and when the orders came in, we shipped the product. When they didn't come in, we said, oh, this month is going to be soft. And yes, we will not make as much money, or we might lose money, which we did not, by the way, any month. But we kept moving forward. But now you had to meet. It is for the CEO, it is one more thing which is very important to do, because you have to beat your drums as a newcomer in the public market space, so that it is after the initial offering, the stock can dive sometime because the CEOs just disappear in running the business. You couldn't do that. And besides doing the work, it was the change of focus and running the company from, also managing investors, their expectation, giving your quarterly calls, talking to the analysts all the time who are asking you how the quarter is going and this, and how do you communicate. SEC rules were very strict rules. So what you could say, what you could not say. So you have to learn. Learning wasn't a big thing, but just day in, day out, interacting with investors was consuming me.
How did you feel? I mean, you sound to me like a very entrepreneurial person who likes running things, solving problems. It's a very different set of activities from managing investors.
It is. You are very perceptive. It was not something, it felt too restrictive because I couldn't say some things. And what I said, I better be right about it. Entrepreneur businesses, you handle new challenges every day. But once you have been a public company and have enough revenues that you have some leeway in what you can do and what you cannot do, it's a different thing. But in the beginning, companies have, they get very restricted by the market.
So did you feel constrained at all? Did it make you rethink your career?
Okay. Yes, it did. It did.
So what was the result of that?
That is what led to the privatization of my company. I reprivatized the company after taking it public because markets were changing and public markets are not very permissive. The financial markets are not permissive that, I have decided this quarter to spend the money in developing, or for next 2 quarters, money into this product. How is that going to, why did you not tell us on the quarterly call? Because we didn't conclude that. So you have to operate in their time window. And we felt that our transition was going to be very hard into newer areas if we continue to stay this. In some ways, I came, at a very different scale. That's what Elon Musk is doing with Twitter, now X. He reprivatized the whole thing. It is a huge risk when you do that. I took that huge risk, which I don't know if any company in those days who was in technology space, who was doing reprivatization of the company.
And how do you pull that off in terms of the financial wherewithal to reprivatize the company?
Well, that is what we had to kind of lean on the banks. The company had the cash because we had done IPO, but to buy the shares and, well, we have to buy everybody's shares and then privatize the company. So depending on how much cash you have, we had a gap and we had to get the gap filled by a bank. So we had to take a loan. It is very complex how to do the privatization, and I went through that. I mean, much more difficult and much more complex than taking the company public.
I think you took your company public in 1994 and then you privatized in 1999, if I recall correctly.
Yes.
That's a pretty short window. So it sounds like almost like you went public and then you're like, this is not going to work out. I'd better take it. So how long did it take from the time you went public till you decided this isn't going to work and we need to be back in the private?
I think it took us a year to actually figure out how we can do. Once we figured out the process, I knew that it was a huge risk. I knew and my husband knew, and we were the one who were buying it back. So we were taking all the risks that were going forward, hoping that there will be big reward at the end of it. But that reward did not happen. It may look short period of time, but we had been in existence for 15 years. We started in 85 to almost 2000 was a
14,
long
15 years.
period of time. In between, we had a window of raising venture fund, then developing products, taking company public, and then dealing. Internet space was changing at an extremely fast pace. So it was like it wasn't giving us a lot of leeway of room when we can do what. So we had to act when we saw that the public market and employees used to get all disenchanted if the stock price fell. So privatization of the company was also partly to keep employees happy. And the value was so hot in those days that employees were leaving for greener pastures.
.coms, yes.
Yeah, so all of those combined, it was becoming really difficult to run the company. And that's why I'm saying that starting a company is one thing, but the whole journey is the hardest thing one would ever do, but is the most exhilarating thing that one would.
Got it. So now you've taken your company private, you've taken these huge risks. What happened to the company after? Can you walk us through the time post-privatization?
So it was basically, we had to exit the company eventually because the markets had collapsed. So I take the company private and internet bubble collapsed. When internet bubble collapsed, not only impacted us, our customers, which were like WorldCom, SBC, or all large telecom companies were our customers, both domestically and internationally. British Telecom, Deutsche Telekom, Air Canada, these were the customers. Everybody started tightening the belt. They not only canceled the orders on the books, they said they're not likely to buy any product for next 2 quarters because they didn't have visibility. So when that kind of an atmosphere happens, the life doesn't give you very many choices and you have to decide whether to hold or to fold. And for a variety of reasons, I decided that was the better path to take, is to exit the company, to fold the company, fairly treat the employees and the vendors. We could have declared bankruptcy, but I'm so proud that I did not. We dished out money from our pockets to compensate people's salaries and everything.
That's fantastic.
So life, you every time you get tested what you should be doing.
Got it. So then looking back, how do you reflect on this whole journey? You started with a certain point of view and an aspiration, an expectation, a vision. You went through all of these challenges, you grew, you learned a bunch of stuff. You took decisions that you didn't anticipate, whether it's going IPO or taking it private. Looking back, what is the one thing that stands out in this whole journey to you as a person?
The learning.
The learning. And what about the learning? Is it the process
The
of learning?
learnings were the experience that you go through at every step shapes you, changes you, builds you up for the rest of your life. And that learning changed me in such dramatic way that I wouldn't have changed if I had worked for somebody else for 50 years. And there is something about running a company that I think that people miss out on is the owner's mindset. You do everything. There is nothing, no pomp, no show. It is reality, and you do it with an owner's mindset. So even now, when I sit on a number of not-for-profit boards, I said, let's think about what the owner of this company would be thinking about, not what makes us look good, what makes the next year look good. So owner's mindset is what I have, which I would have never learned. When you are in that hot seat for 20 years, how can you not get it?
Got it. And then looking back, is there anything that you would have done differently, knowing what you know now?
I actually think that looking back, I think I was daring and I did the right things by continuing to roll the dice. I rolled the dice 3 times, starting a company, then privatizing the company, and then shutting the company. So it was a journey, and I think net I came out far ahead financially. I could have come out more ahead had if rolling the dice had worked the second and the third time, but it did not. But you are going to suffer falls anytime, and you brush your knees, you get up. Sometimes it takes longer. Some experiences are worse than the other experiences, but you learn to get up and get going again because, and overall, it was a journey that I would not give up for anything.
That's great to hear. I want to kind of link it back to something you said in the beginning. You said this is about purpose, right? And we talked about all the different decisions you had to take. It's very clear that you placed doing the right thing by people very high on your list of priorities. Can you comment on what you think was the sense of purpose that drove you early on? And has that changed over time? And what is the one thing that kept pulling you through all of these experiences?
I would say the one thing that I have, if I examine my own life, I've learned is that you have to take a deeper dive within and find what that purpose is at different moments in time. What are you trying to achieve? What is bothering you? All these things have to culminate. So I am, for example, for the last almost 20 years, 19 to be more precise, I have been not working for money. But you can't be just sitting and not doing anything. You still need a purpose in life. And I'm a fighter. I am competitive, highly competitive. So I need to find something which is going to keep me excited. And I don't want to lose my goodness in doing that. It takes a long time to build your reputation, and one bad choice can kill your reputation in 1 second. So you have to preserve your own integrity. It should be a high priority in life, and we all are instilled with that, I would say. So, given all that, I think listening to yourself, listening to your instincts is important. And I put it also in terms of women in general are not taught to do that. They are always looking for endorsement of other people. And we say, well, they lack confidence. But what is this confidence? The confidence to me means that we can do it. Listen to yourself. You are not going to work your life with somebody else's brain. You got one brain and one only brain. So that's how I work. That's how I operate my life, even now.
Got it. And I want to come back to that in a few minutes. But before that, I want to touch on this aspect you mentioned of being a woman, being South Asian, being an immigrant. How has that identity impacted your choices and your journey as an entrepreneur?
Well, I grew up in India for 23. I was 23 when I came here. The initial years, they leave a huge imprint on you. So the culture, the upbringing at home, and what we were learning, what was emphasized, what was not emphasized. My Indianness doesn't go away no matter how long. I've been here 50 years, sorry. 50 years, 23 years back in India. So I would say that even though I've been here 50 years, I am so much formed by Indian value system. What the biggest lesson is in India, we have always heard that do the work, don't worry about the results. And that is a reminder whenever we come to the juncture, just do the hard work and hopefully results will come is the message. And US has given me a lot too, and I value that. I value the work ethics of American culture.
Got it. So I want to probe on one thing, right? So this whole point you brought up of two things actually. One is do the work and don't worry about the results. And the other thing is be seen and not heard, right? So in some sense, they're antithetical, I would argue, to the American way of doing things, which is, hey, you have to be results driven. Everything is about the outcomes, which is very different than do the work and let the outcomes be what they are. Was that ever a conflict? And how did you reconcile that? And then secondly, to those of us who have been brought up in the be seen and don't be heard, don't rock the boat, be humble, be self-effacing, how do you overcome that inner programming and find out who the real you is versus the conditioned you is, especially if you've been brought up in a culture or an environment which says, be humble, don't rock the boat?
Shubha, you are asking very complicated questions. I've reflected on these things quite a bit, so I do like them. So, what can I say about it is seen and not heard. Who is real you and who is the outwardly you? I think as we go through our experiences, we learn about who the real me is. It does tell you. And I think the ultimate is becoming, you have arrived when you feel comfortable in your own skin. Then you know that you have gained the confidence for which you were striving for. You know that the only person you recognize and can retain in your internal and outwardly outlook is the real you. The pretend goes away. It was a varnish which entered your head. It gets ingrained by different people, whether they are your parents or teachers or society, your co-workers, all those things. So I think listening to your instincts, the art of listening to your instinct is what we need to develop. And the only way we can develop, in my mind, or the way I developed, is by saying, whose brain am I going to think with? My brain. That's all I have. That's been powerful, but it is not easy to practice.
Are there tips that helped you do it better than otherwise?
I think I tend to hang little cards on my desk and write things that I need to incorporate in my personality. And they change from year to year. It's like my New Year resolutions, but it is more not what I'm going to accomplish. They used to be that way. But as I have grown and I understand life a little better, they are more about how I can become a better person.
Got it. Very inspiring. Thank you. So I want to shift a little bit and talk about a couple other aspects of being South Asian or an immigrant woman being a founder. What have you seen in terms of the trends from kind of when you were building your company to today? What are some big trends that you see with women who are trying to start companies? Are there things that have gotten more difficult? What has gotten easier? And what counsel would you give somebody like this looking to start a scalable startup to improve their odds of success?
I think the South Asian women today, the numbers are hundredfold compared to when I was there. I mean, they obviously have the ability, they always had the ability. They are going more into STEM education. They are not afraid to take the leap. They are not as dependent. That they will marry and that is how they are going to make their food come to the table. So all these little things that have transpired in Indian woman's life at back home as in India as well as here has inspired them probably to do better and better. And examples don't hurt. You always think, oh, that is my person who looks and smells like me, and the person has done this. So you have removed one barrier in the mind that you can do. If this person can do it, so can you.
And do you think there's any negative to that? Because now that in theory there are fewer barriers, I wouldn't say no barriers, there's a risk that if you haven't done it, therefore it's your own fault, whereas that might not be the case. I mean, in some cases, the barriers might still be there. Sorry, you shook your head.
No, I was saying you are absolutely right. It is your fault if you haven't done it. It was your fault before and it is your fault now. So take the ownership of what you are doing, which is what you said effectively.
Got it. You finished, your journey with the company. How did you redefine your purpose? How did you redefine your direction? And how do you now frame your life in your post-startup journey? And how did your startup journey influence that?
So it has become far more interesting now than it ever was. And I say that because I am involved in number of boards. They are all not-for-profit boards, but one is Mathematical Society, one is Stanford Medicine. They have a specialized South Asian health focus. I'm involved in their board. I'm involved in Palo Alto Medical Foundation board, which is a local healthcare provider, very huge one with 2,000 doctors, physicians. So it's a huge organization. And then there is something called Asia Society. So I meet different set of people and they are all very accomplished board members on these. So just rubbing shoulders with them, being able to contribute to the strategy of the organization. And these people are from different walks of life than what I have gone through. They are not technology companies. I'm not on technology boards. So my learning and enrichment as a result has been quite dramatic, and I enjoy every moment of that. And then I play bridge, which takes 30% of my time, which is, and learning bridge is as hard as the journey of being an entrepreneur. The learning never stops. It takes decades, generally 20 years before you become real expert in bridge, if you were playing full time. So it is a very difficult journey and a game of mind, which is none of the computers have been able to defeat expert bridge players. And I've won 3 national championship. So I have progressed quite dramatically, but that progress has taken a lot of hard work and hours and money in that way. So doing that, and so I made bridge, this we talked about, and then I do writing, which is another journey which I have really gained a lot. How to be more organized in my thinking, how not to just rattle out things, how to concatenate the words to form sentences which are easy to understand. So English wasn't my first language. So that was another step up for me. I never thought I would be writing. And the fourth thing I do is I do painting. And I always call it is like a filler where I'm not doing anything. I'm painting and let the thoughts settle down in my brain. And I always have a painting on the aisle.
That's fascinating. So would you recommend that for founders who are building their companies today, would you recommend any of these activities to enrich?
I think having some creative aspect to them, like doing any kind of artwork, whether or poetry or writing, that has a lot of creative element. Engineering or research, for example, which a lot of us have done, they tend to be more unidimensional. This has more, this gives you breadth of thinking, creative thinking, where you don't have to have preconceived notions on how to paint, how to write a poem, for example. So I think that the other activities require time. So entrepreneurs and people in the hot seat and professional careers, they do not have that much time. And women especially are running their family, taking care of children. Primary responsibility still happens to fall on the women. So they lack the time to do anything. But creativity is something you can do rather than worrying. You can do that and get your mind more organized. And of course, meditation, some people find that as a tool to do the same thing, but I have not been a meditator.
Hey, thank you. So in conclusion, what words of wisdom would you offer to either a younger version of yourself or to other women just starting out this journey?
Be you. Just try to be you.
What does it mean? So I'm going to challenge you on that. So what does it mean to be you?
Be you means don't do anything which looks artificial, that you have to struggle to portray yourself. If you are projecting yourself the way you are, others will come to you or engage with you. I think engagement is something we need in professions as well as social life. And if we can be ourselves, people find us more interesting. People believe us more. They trust us more. And job becomes far easier.
And one last question on that. Where do you split the line between learning new skills that feel uncomfortable or new ways of thinking about things? For example, taking risks when you don't feel comfortable taking risks versus figuring out who is the real you, which is, as you can see, this is a repeating theme that I'm struggling with as well. Any words on that?
I would say there are two different things. That being you is who you are. And part of us as humans need successes to feel that our life was worth living, that we did something which was worth doing. So I think striving to do something, to accomplish something, is natural and should be done. And that is part of life that you should not back away from. So being you doesn't mean that you become easy on yourself.
Got it. Well said. On those words, I want to thank you. This has been an amazing and to me, a very enriching conversation. And I'm very sure our listeners will feel the same way as well. Thank you so much for being generous.
Thank you very much, Shubha. I enjoyed talking.
And that's a wrap for today. Thank you for tuning in. If you find these conversations helpful in your own journey, please subscribe to Seed to Success, our weekly community letter with tips, insights, resources, and more. If you have any other questions relating to startup finance or financial storytelling, send them over to me at chakras@achieve.co. That's chakras@achiiv.co. We'll see you on the next episode of Invisible Ink. Now, go achieve.